Hey everybody, it's Steve from Steve's Cable Corner, coming at you from beautiful Westford, Massachusetts. Here to talk about some more Linden cables. And today what we're going to discuss is one of the early evolutions in our product development phase. It was in the early days when we were designing some new products and patenting our first US patents. The very first patent that we were awarded was in 2009. And the name of that was, hold on to your hats, the name of that was Environmentally Robust Liquid Crystal Polymer Coated Fiber Cable and its use in hermetic packaging. And so that covered the design of our cable with the extruded LCP that we talked about in some of our earlier videos, namely when we talked about Linden SPE 7034 and 7035. Today we're going to be talking about another product, Linden SPE 7043. And what happened here was that in about the early 2010s, we were playing around with making our cable what we like to call a little bit more handleable. And so with the LCP extruded over the fiber, because of its extreme strength in the axial direction, it has a little bit of a stiffness to it. And so as you get this layer thicker and thicker, you get stronger and stronger cables, but you can get a stiffer and stiffer cable. So we explored other materials and how we could use them to get a flexible cable, one that wouldn't kink. So imagine when you pull your garden hose off of the side of your house, okay? If you have a garden hose coiled up. If there's no water in it especially, sometimes you'll get this sharp bend where it will kink. And so what we wanted to do was use some materials to basically safeguard against that and provide something that would not kink when the cable was being used and wrapped and unwrapped in whatever way, shape, or form. And so what we did was we basically took our original design, 7034, and we put some different materials on the outer layer. Now, the thing with LCP is it's very strong, but it has very, very low elongation at break, which means that how long will something elongate before it breaks? So imagine a rubber band, right? So a rubber band will stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch, and it will stretch several 100%, maybe 1,000% before it even gets close to breaking. Something else like a carbon rope, something that has very high strength, but very low stretch, will have low elongation at break. Our LCP, the elongation at break is only about 3 to 4%, meaning if you take 1 meter, stretch that about to 1 meter and 3 centimeters, it's gonna break. What we wanted to do was take some material with some much higher elongation at break, something more rubbery, so to speak, and put that on the outside. So our 7043, it does have a little bit thicker LCP. So the LCP goes to 35 thousandths of an inch. And what that does is it gets us strength close to 100 pounds of tensile strength out of this cable. And now what we did was we extruded on top of that a thin layer of polyurethane. Now polyurethane, depending on the grade, can have an elongation at break upwards of 300 to 400%. And so now what happens is if you take this cable, it's much more handleable, it's a little bit bigger. This one clocks in just under 2 millimeters. I think it's a 1.65 millimeters. And what happens is if you take this and try to kink it, it has a tendency to want to uncurl. You see how right here, I'm pulling on this and it doesn't want to kink, it wants to uncurl itself. And so what we did was we applied for and were awarded a patent in 2014 called non-kink, non-hockling optical cable. And that is covered by this design where we put a material with high elongation at break, a rubbery material on top of a material with low elongation at break, namely our LCP. And we get a cable that is much easier to kind of roll up in your hand and use and grab and twist. And as you twist it, boom, it doesn't kink. This comes in a red color. You can make it any color you want. We do have a different version of this, which we'll cover in a later episode. If you need some cable that exploits the characteristics of our LCP, but you want something a little bit bigger, a little bit more robust, a little bit more resistant to kinking in terms of fish bite, or if you get to drag it underwater against rocks or something like that. We've got people using these cables for all sorts of crazy things. And actually, looking back at this in the early days, we did take one of these cables and we did a really, really interesting test with the Navy. I believe it was in Panama City, Florida. And what they did was they took our cable and they wanted to see how resistant it was to fish bite. For this fish bite test, they actually used crabs, okay? They're trying to mimic the jaws of a fish where it's like a trigger fish. So a crab's claws are relatively similar and they're easier to work with. So what they do is they take a cable like this, they string it up in a tank, they put squid meat along it, and then they put it in a tank with crabs. The crabs eat that squid meat, and as they're eating the squid meat, as you can imagine, they're not very neat, and their claws are going all over this cable. Now they're transmitting light along this cable to make sure that it won't break. And so we had our cable tested that way by Navy, and it passed the squid meat crab bite test, or as we call it, the fish bite test. So if you have any questions about that, any other crazy uses you might think that this could be applicable, please look us up, lindencables.com. I'll see you in the next episode.